They applauded before they remembered who I was. That's the thing about applause. It doesn't ask questions. It fills space. It assumes success. It forgives history. I stood just off stage, the sound rolling toward me in waves, watching strangers rise from their seats as if summoned by something holy. The moderator was still talking, still padding my introduction with phrases like visionary and industry shaping, still mispronouncing my last name in a way that sounded confident enough to be forgiven. I didn't correct him. I never correct people anymore. I let time do it. My name is Mara Ellison, and 10 years ago, I learned how quietly a woman can be removed from her own work. The ballroom smelled like citrus polish and expensive wine. Crystal chandeliers refracted light into 1,000 soft distortions, making everyone look better than they deserved. I scanned the audience from behind the curtain, my pulse steady, my hands loose at my sides. This wasn't nerves, this was memory. The body remembers things, the mind pretends it's over. Please welcome, the moderator said, pausing for effect, the architect behind the adaptive forecasting model that redefined regional logistics. Applause swelled again. I closed my eyes. It had been a Tuesday, ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of day you don't protect yourself against. 6 years into my job at Halion Systems, my calendar filled itself. Meetings bred meetings. I had learned how to speak fluently in performance metrics and deliverables, how to translate complicated thinking into something executives could nod at without feeling threatened. I believed back then that competence accumulated, that if you stayed long enough, proved yourself often enough, you earned safety. The meeting invite came that morning. No agenda, just a title, alignment. I remember noticing the peace lily in the conference room first, overwatered, yellowing at the edges. I remember thinking someone should really take better care of it. Calvin Reed sat across from me, hands folded, his expression already apologetic. There was a woman beside him from HR, Janice, I think, smiling with her lips and nothing else. They talked for a while. Market pressures, shifting priorities, strategic recalibration, words designed to create fog. Finally, Calvin said, "We're eliminating your role." Just like that. I waited for the explanation, the error, the moment where he realized he was speaking too soon. Instead, Janice slid a folder toward me. Severance, 2 months, a non-disclosure clause tucked inside like a warning. But I just delivered the Delta model. It outperformed projections by... Yes, Calvin said quickly, and that work will continue to be very valuable to the team. The team. I saw it then. The relief. The release of a man putting down something heavy once it no longer required moral consideration. I wasn't being fired. I was being extracted. They kept my work. They kept the framework. They kept the credit. They just didn't keep me. My replacement started 2 weeks later. Owen Park, 27, polite, bright. He shook my hand like he was grateful. "I've heard so much about you," he said. I trained him because I was told to, because refusing would jeopardize my severance, because women like me are taught that professionalism is dignity, even when it's used as a leash. I showed him the shortcuts, the weaknesses in the data, the places the models lied if you didn't interrogate them properly. He listened. He thanked me. He took notes. On my last day, he brought me a coffee and said, "I hope I can do this justice." I smiled and told him he would. That night, I went home and screamed into a pillow until my throat hurt. The months after were worse than the firing. Silence has weight when you're used to relevance. Recruiters stopped responding. Interviews stalled after reference checks. Feedback arrived vague and polite and lethal. I didn't need to ask who was doing it. Calvin never said anything outright. He didn't have to. He specialized in implication, raised eyebrows, phrases like brilliant but difficult, and not always aligned with leadership. By the end of the year, I was freelancing under a friend's company name just to keep the lights on. I learned how to live smaller. No vacations, fewer dinners out, pride swallowed daily. But something else happened too. Without Hallian's constraints, my work changed. I stopped smoothing my thinking to make it palatable. I stopped translating truth into comfort. I built models the way I always wanted to, lean, precise, unafraid of making people uncomfortable. One client became 3, 3 became 10. A logistics firm in Arizona asked me to solve a forecasting problem they'd thrown millions at. I solved it in 6 weeks. Another company noticed, then another. By the time Hallian announced their new direction at the industry summit 2 years later, I was already working more than I ever had, on my own terms. When the keynote invitation arrived, I laughed out loud. They didn't know. The email praised my innovative contributions. It mentioned the Delta model by name. They wanted me on stage because my work had become unavoidable, because ignoring me now would be embarrassing. I accepted immediately. And now, standing at the edge of the stage, listening to them clap, I stepped into the light. The applause lingered as I walked to the podium. I set my notes down carefully, not because I needed them, but because ritual buys you silence. When the room settled, I looked out at them. "Thank you," I said. "I promise I'll make this worth your time." A few laughs. Good. I was asked to talk about innovation, about resilience, about success. I paused. But I want to start with a Tuesday. The room quieted. I was working at a tech company. I'd been there 6 years. I'd just delivered the strongest performing model my team had ever produced. That Tuesday, I was called into a meeting called alignment. Recognition moved through the crowd. I was told my role was being eliminated, not because of performance, because my work could continue without me. A silence thick enough to feel. I trained my replacement because professionalism is often just survival wearing a nicer outfit. I scanned the room then and found Calvin. His hands had stopped clapping. His face had gone pale. Recognition bloomed, slowly, painfully. "I don't tell this story with bitterness," I said. "I tell it with clarity. Because what I learned wasn't resilience." I leaned forward slightly. It was freedom. I spoke about extraction, about systems that reward obedience over insight, about how innovation doesn't come from environments where people are disposable. When I finished, the applause was different, slower, deeper, real. Backstage, my hands shook as the adrenaline drained. I breathed through it, steady. In the hallway afterward, Calvin found me. "That was powerful," he said. "Thank you," I replied. "I didn't realize—" "You don't need to explain," I said gently. "I understand the system." He nodded, smaller than I remembered. "I'm glad you're doing well." "I am." It wasn't forgiveness. It was closure without permission. Outside, the night air was cool and indifferent. The city moved on. My phone buzzed with messages. Clients, friends, a woman I didn't know thanking me for saying something she needed to hear. I smiled. They had clapped because they thought the story was over. It wasn't. It never is when you finally stop asking to be allowed on stage.